indicated, we have an outstanding guest. He is the editor-in-chief, and my understanding is the founder of RedState, which is one of the premier internet blogs and magazines in our country right now that conservatives read. And so we are just honored to have him on. So, Eric, please take the floor, speak 7 to 10 minutes if you would, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Sure. Well, thanks very much for having me. I am Erick Erickson, editor of RedState, and people give me the credit for founding RedState all the time. As 3 buddies of mine came up with the idea, and when they realized I was a lawyer, they put me in charge of it, and I've kind of run with it ever since. I've got a radio show in Atlanta on WSB. I cover drive time on the largest talk station in the country, and it's just been a real blessing to be able to be involved in politics over time and to see things trend and untrend, go up and go down in popularity over time. The thing I've noticed as well, being on CNN for 3 years and then on Fox, is there are a lot of people out there in the media and politics who comment on things without any sense of history. For many of the political reporters of the day right now, history for them began with Bush versus Gore in 2000. They've got no real recollection of politics and no will to understand politics before then. And even the younger reporters, frankly, in their 20s, many of them, their sense of politics in place came in 2008. What they do not understand is that events change things. Events really do change things. There was peace in Europe until there wasn't because of events with Hitler and storming into Poland and Czechoslovakia. Events changed things. They thought they were going to have peace in their times. Events changed things. Barack Obama and the Democrats took over Congress and the White House in 2006 and 2008, and they were going to have a permanent Democratic majority until they passed Obamacare on party line votes, and the House Republicans came in the largest wave when you go all the way down to the local level back to the late 1800s. Events changed those things. George Bush and the Republicans were going to have a permanent Republican majority. They did things to have that majority. No Child Left Behind, steel tariffs for Pennsylvania, Medicare Part D. They won re-election in 2004. The Democrats looked imploded, but events changed those things too. Events always change things, and reporters, I think, tend to play up the poll of the day rather than taking a long-term perspective, an historic perspective, that events do change things. The rollout of Obamacare, its disaster, the president's continued wavering on Obamacare, his war on coal, people being fed up with the president, those events change things too. The Pew poll from yesterday shows that more and more young millennials, the press loves to focus on millennials because many of them still think of themselves as millennials. They dress and act like it no matter how old they are. They lack a maturity that professionals in their organizations used to have because they had come out of wars that these guys haven't. They've come out of culture wars, not real wars, and they haven't had to grow up as a result. Many of these young millennials that are tiring on Barack Obama are shifting their allegiance more and more towards the Republican Party. Millennials were going to be a force for the Democrats, but events changed things. Hispanics in Texas, even in the Democratic primary, they rejected Wendy Davis. They didn't like her. They don't connect with her. They don't relate to her. The national Democrats were convinced they could pour money into Texas and turn Texas blue and grab it for the Democratic Party. But events changed things there too. And so we see that events change things throughout history, throughout immediate politics, and people are still concerned about a permanent Democratic majority. There's no such thing as permanence in politics, which gets us to where we are today with the Republican Party and the fight within the Republican Party between conservatives and the establishment in Washington, D.C. Over the weekend, Mitch McConnell, the Senate Republican leader, gave a quote to the New York Times. He said his plan on dealing with conservative challengers around the country is to crush them everywhere. Now, he backpedaled after some blowback and said he was just talking about the Senate Conservatives Fund, a group I happen to support. But he's been very consistent over time. Mitch McConnell, the Senate Republican leader, has called conservatives and Tea Party activists, he's called them bullies, he's called them traitors, he's called them fringe. He said they tear up the joint every time they come in like they're walking into a bar. He said he wants to punch Tea Party activists in the nose. This is the Senate Republican leader. Events can change things in Kentucky. He's being primaried by a guy named Matt Bevin. I tell people on my radio show and at RedState all the time, if you are going to change America, you must change Washington. If you want to change Washington, you must change the Republicans in charge of the Republican Party in Washington. And I mean that very seriously. if you look at the Republicans who, should they come back in ascendancy, they are the same Republicans who gave us No Child Left Behind, which paved the way for Common Core. They are the same Republicans who gave us Medicare Part D, which exploded the federal budget. They are the same Republicans who collaborated with the Democrats to ban the light bulb. They are the same Republicans who collaborated with the Democrats on TARP. They are the same Republicans who collaborated with the Democrats on the General Motors bailout. They are the same Republicans who decided to give up the fight on Obamacare because they wanted to go home for Christmas instead of forcing the Democrats to stay in Washington, pulling every parliamentary procedure they could. Yes, they've completely rewritten it. Yes, they've said it was inevitable. What they failed to see is that we recognize the rules of the Senate allowed them to keep fighting through Christmas, getting into the new year, getting Scott Brown there, grinding things to a halt. They refused to fight, and we got Obamacare. And these are the people who will come back to Washington and will be in charge of the Republican Party, should they come back, unless conservative activists around the country rally and support the challengers to these Republicans, rally and support good people who are changing the face of Washington. If you want to change America, you've got to change Washington. But you can't change Washington without changing a Republican leadership that has stacked the deck in favor of itself. Win or lose, they profit. Win or lose, they get to sit at the table. Win or lose, their lobbyists get kickbacks. The Republican Party now, along with the Democratic Party, looks to see what is in Wall Street's interests. They talk about Main Street, but in practice, they focus on Wall Street. They focus on their mega donors. They don't focus on their small dollar donors. They focus on the middle class. They don't focus on Main Street. Main Street falls further and further behind, while Wall Street profits, whether anyone wins or loses. And the Republicans and Democrats are both to blame. Friends, I'm sorry, but we didn't get to $17 trillion in national debt with just the Democrats in charge. The Republicans did it too. The Republicans hid behind war spending, but if you actually look at the math during the Bush administration, the war spending was paid for. It was all the reckless domestic policies they tried to use to bribe their way with the American public into keeping power that really blew up the federal debt. I mean, the Republicans have forgotten that the problem with government is, as Ronald Reagan said, government itself. The Republicans have decided that the problem with government is Democrats in charge of it. They think they can tame and control the Leviathan. They can't tame and control the Leviathan. The Leviathan consumes them as much as it has consumed the Democrats. So to change it, we must change the Republicans. And that gets us to Ted Cruz and Rand Paul. Right now, they seem to be on opposite sides. And you will notice that the press and the Republican establishment is singing Rand Paul's praises. To his credit, he surprised them. They opposed him in his primaries. In fact, they lied to James Dobson. They told James Dobson that Rand Paul was pro-abortion. When James Dobson looked into it in 2010, he realized they had lied to him and changed his endorsement to Rand Paul. And Rand got to Washington, and God bless him. He was able to make hay. He was able to raise people's attention on the National Security Agency and surveillance and drones. But he's also been a very good team player for the Republicans. And right now, he's endorsing Mitch McConnell in Kentucky. Mitch McConnell and him are buddy-buddy. He voted for Chuck Hagel for Secretary of Defense. He didn't stand with Rand Paul and Mike Lee on the Obamacare fight. I really like Rand Paul, but I've been disappointed at his co-opting of the establishment and the establishment's co-opting of him. And I find it no coincidence that suddenly his press is through the roof. The Republican establishment is fawning over Rand Paul because they see they can pit him against Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz, however, and Mike Lee as well, who's underestimated in the United States Senate, they've stood with conservative activists across the country. They fought against Obamacare. They fought against the national debt. They fought to force Republicans on the record in the Senate to show they were really happy with raising the debt limit in the Senate and raising the debt limit in the country without any strings attached. The Republicans in the United States House and Senate allowed Barack Obama to raise the national debt limit with no cap. They gave him a blank check. He can spend as much as he wants until March of 2015 without any restraint because of Republicans in Congress. So between Rand and Ted right now, I find myself standing with Ted because I find Ted standing with me more than with the guys in Washington. And I hope that Rand will come to his senses and realize if he wants to be president, he probably doesn't need to co-opt the establishment. He needs to beat the establishment like Ted Cruz and Mike Lee and so many others are doing. So I hope when you go to the polls and when you decide to get involved with candidates and when you decide to get involved with policy that you remember, again, To change America, you must change Washington. To change Washington, you cannot let the same Republicans who have been there since 1985 be the face of change in Washington, D.C. We need fresh leaders in Washington. We need fresh faces. We need fresh ideas. We need people who worship God more than K Street. I'll hand it over to questions now.
All right. Well, thank you very, very much, Eric. That's very provocative, very interesting. And folks, all you have to do is press *6 if you have any questions that you need to have answered. Let me probe you a little bit on this idea. If you have to change Washington, if you want to change America, America's problems are economic and fiscal, constitutional and legal, but they're also spiritual and moral.
Right.
Do you think that we can change America by somehow changing the spiritual tempo and morality of Washington, or do we need to have something happen in America first that then gets reflected in Washington?
I think it's got to happen in America before it happens in Washington, D.C. We need a revival in the country. We need a lot more people praying for the country than we have. I got to tell you, one of my key frustrations in life these days is when I see churches going off on mission trips to, Haiti and Honduras and hanging out on the beach in Mexico. I live just south of Atlanta, Georgia. There is a mission field in my backyard. I think Protestants in America need to get on board with what Catholics have done and start private schools in the country that any poor person can go to because the public schools are leaving them behind. Too many Christians have decided to hand over their role in social justice to the government instead of doing it through the church. I am a Christian, and I'm a small government guy because I'm a Christian. I understand we're all born sinners, and I want as few of them in charge of me as possible.
Okay. All right, Daniel, let's go and take some more questions.